Be quiet. So, when we talk about photosynthesis and respiration today, these are basically two chemical reactions that take place in living organisms. And they're both related and connected to each other. They're both ways of transferring energy from one form to another. So before we actually get into it, does a battery contain energy in it?
No.
A battery?
Yes.
Yes. You could put it into an electronic device and you can use that electricity. Does a gallon of gasoline have energy in it?
Yes. It runs
All right, so give me your reasoning. Why are you saying yes or no? Joe, what do you say?
I said no because the gasoline gets like lit on fire or something and that's the energy.
Okay. Jaden, what are you going to say?
Well, first off, if you
Jaden,
do that,
what is it? What's your explanation?
when you put it into your gas tank, then once it goes through, it goes into your engine and just the gasoline powers it.
Yeah, so gasoline does have energy in it. That energy can be released when it burns. You know, if you lit it on fire, obviously. You transform that energy from a stored chemical energy in the gasoline to light and heat. Or if you put it in the engine of a car, it's a controlled combustion of that energy, and that energy from the gasoline is transformed into mechanical energy that allows your car to move. Does a log have energy? A piece of firewood?
Yes.
No?
Oh.
Oh yeah, because it's a living thing.
Yeah.
Yes, it does. And you can release that energy by burning it. Okay? But all those things contain energy, and we can use the energy in different ways. But oftentimes energy needs to be transformed from one form to another to make it more useful. Can you take some of that gasoline and pour it into your cell phone to charge it up? Obviously not. But what could you do with the gasoline to charge your cell phone? Eric?
Maybe you could like burn the gasoline so it makes like energy or something, and then like maybe like somehow make it go through like the charger.
You're close, and there's actually a piece of equipment that some of you might have at your house that does that.
Is it a
It's-
generator?
Yes, a generator. You might have one in your basement, you might have one outside your house that is filled with diesel fuel probably. And if you lose power to your house, the generator kicks on, it burns the gasoline or the diesel fuel and turns it into electricity, which you can then use to power your phone. So those things all have energy, but often it needs to be changed from one form to another to make it more useful. Well, the same thing is true in living things. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about photosynthesis and respiration. So you guys know about photosynthesis, the basics. If I say, what is photosynthesis, you'll give me a relatively basic definition. What would you say? If I ask, what is photosynthesis? Griffin?
It's like where you take the sun and convert the cell converts it into energy.
Okay. So, sort of. So it uses the sunlight, definitely. Converts it, but doesn't convert it into energy. It actually takes, takes energy from the sun and stores it in food. Now we're going to get more specific today about exactly what's happening there. But that's probably the definition most people would say. Using the sun's energy to make food that plants do.
Is that what the chloroplast does?
It happens in the chloroplast, yes. So what we are going to be doing is writing out what we call a chemical equation that tells what's happening. And we're going to be getting to chemistry in our next unit, and we'll learn more about chemical reactions. But we write them as a series of things going in, and then what is produced. And that's what these symbols up here represent. So in photosynthesis, first of all, like Griffin said, we must have energy from light. Now, it can be artificial light, doesn't necessarily have to be sunlight, but we need light for photosynthesis. Or I shouldn't say we, I should say plants. Plants need light for photosynthesis. And then they need two other sort of raw materials. We might call them ingredients. So this plant, this geranium plant back here, is undergoing photosynthesis right now. It has light from outside. Needs a couple other things though. What's one thing, Joe?
Water?
Needs water. Where does it get the water? How though? How does the water get into these cells in the leaves? Logan? Yeah, it comes in, plants absorb water through the soil. Sometimes you don't even have soil. This is a basil plant just growing in water alone. The roots are able to absorb water and they get it to the leaves where it's used in photosynthesis. Sometimes, yes. It depends. And then it needs something else. Another ingredient here in order for photosynthesis to work. Yeah?
It needs to have, it needs to have, like,
I mean, energy, I guess.
Well, the sunlight provides the
oh
energy.
yeah, so they need,
There.
Oxygen?
Close. It's a gas, but not oxygen. It's another gas that's found in the air. Colton?
Yeah.
It's carbon dioxide.
Yeah.
So what we are filling in here, we call these symbols. We call these chemical symbols. You know that obviously water is H2O, you all know that.
Yeah.
Carbon dioxide, you might know, is CO2. Okay? But there's others we're going to talk about. And so what those symbols tell us is which elements are present in water, in carbon dioxide. So water is made of 2 atoms of hydrogen bonded to 1 atom of oxygen. Carbon dioxide is 1 atom of carbon bonded to 2 oxygens. That's what these numbers and letters are telling us. We'll do a lot more with these in our next unit. Logan? These are one on the wall there. Joe?
what would happen if it had like 2 hydrogen, but they weren't broken up?
Then you would just have elemental hydrogen and oxygen, 2 different things. Hydrogen's a gas, oxygen is a gas. So when they bond together, they form what we call compounds. We'll talk a lot more about it in our next one. So we have energy from the sun, we have chloroplast, and we have the raw materials of water, carbon dioxide. Those elements get rearranged and recombined into a new form. You guys said photosynthesis makes food for the plant. Well, it doesn't make veggie burgers and falafel sandwiches. That's not the kind of food it makes. It makes one specific molecule. That molecule is glucose. Glucose has a chemical symbol of C6, H12, O6.
Wait, C6?
H12, O6.
Oh, you're seasick?
And, yep, and that, so obviously glucose is a larger molecule than carbon dioxide. It has 6 carbons and 12 hydrogens and 6 oxygens, so it's a larger molecule. And within the bonds of those atoms being held together, energy is stored. Just like energy is stored in the bonds of gasoline or in the wood. The energy is stored in that material. So light energy is transformed into energy stored in glucose in photosynthesis. And it produces 1 more additional product. And that's oxygen, O2.
Are we gonna need to know all these
Yes.
stuff for quiz?
Yes.
Or that
So the ultimate, oh, the other thing, when we're writing chemical reactions like this, this is not an equal sign. We use an arrow there. And we say, usually we'll say yield. So water plus carbon dioxide yields glucose and oxygen. Also, light doesn't really belong there. In a real, correct chemical reaction, light shouldn't be here. Because it's not a material, it's not matter. Sometimes light would be put above the arrow, because you want only actually atoms and matter in these boxes. But for our purposes right now, that's okay. The other thing, the stuff on the left side of the arrow in a chemical reaction, we call those things the reactants. And the things on the other side of the arrow, we call those the products. They're being produced. So in photosynthesis, the ultimate goal is to produce glucose. And that's why plants don't need to eat anything. They have an endless supply of glucose as long as they have sunlight and carbon dioxide and water. They make their own glucose or sugar, and that's what they live off of. So plants use that glucose to grow larger, they harvest the energy out of it. Griffin?
So we're gonna have to know.
Yes.
H2O
Yes.
for this quiz.
Yes. All right,
Also,
Arpon,
This is kind of related to this. Why is it called photosynthesis? Like, how did the
Photo? photo means light, synthesis means to make something. So to make something using light. In this case, the something being made is glucose.
There's a camera, that's why I call it a photo.
A photograph.
Oh, we learned like that part of like cosmetics. Not cosmetics. It's like it
Elements,
has
periodic
like
table.
CO2.
Yeah.
The periodic
No.
table.
You're not gonna have to remember, we'll use it. Griffin, one more question.
what is like the base element, the base element that everything comes from?
There are a bunch of elements, over 100 elements, which are pure substances, and everything else is made out of those elements.
Is hydrogen?
Yes. All right,
What?
so this is how plants make their own food. Our next topic to talk about is this process called respiration, or better, it's better called cellular respiration, really, because sometimes respiration can be confused with breathing. And if you compare the equation of photosynthesis with the equation of respiration, you'll notice that they look sort of similar, but they're reversed. And that's because respiration is almost the exact opposite of photosynthesis, with a change. So in respiration, this is a process that happens in all living things. And the raw materials, the reactants, anyone want to guess what these two boxes might be based on what I told you? Joe? Yeah, it's glucose and oxygen. Respiration starts with glucose and oxygen. Rearranges the atoms to form some new things.
So
Now, what did I say about glucose? Plants took energy from the sun and stored it where?
inside their.
Energy from light is stored where in photosynthesis? Yeah, but what molecule contains the energy there? Nope.
Water?
Nope.
Is it cool?
Nope. Nope. Light has the energy to begin, and that energy ends up in glucose. In respiration, the energy starts as glucose, but then, like you can't pour water or pour gasoline into your cell phone, cells can't directly use glucose to really do anything. They need to transform it one more time into a molecule called ATP,
What's that?
adenosine triphosphate.
What do you need to know?
All tight pants.
You need to know ATP.
Alright, I don't even know what
So, ATP is what all cells use to actually get things done, to do work. It's a very important molecule in living cells. And it comes from this process called respiration. Respiration takes glucose as the fuel, it requires oxygen, and it produces this special molecule that stores energy called ATP. And it produces two other waste products that you can probably tell me.
Can I see it?
What would they be, Griffin? What? Water and carbon dioxide. So the things that are on the left side of the reaction in photosynthesis are on the right in respiration. And vice versa. The difference is that we don't produce light. If we did, we'd all be glowing. We're not. Instead, the energy is transformed into ATP. Again, these are the reactants, these are the products. And the ultimate goal of this is for the cell to release ATP, a form of energy the cells can directly
I love it.
use. Joe?
So like if something's not flammable, it'll like not have any energy.
Not necessarily. Things can still contain energy even if they're not flammable. It kind of depends on different factors about what it's made of. Pretty much.
So does rock air contain energy? Rock?
So photosynthesis and respiration form what we call the carbon cycle. And because photosynthesis, the end products are glucose and oxygen, in respiration, those are the reactants. And the products are carbon dioxide and water, which plants can use for photosynthesis and release oxygen and glucose. We have this rotating cycle because where do we need energy in our cells. So in our cells, respiration is happening. But where do we get the glucose we need? We can't make it in
We
photosynthesis.
eat, because we take it
In the foods that we eat, they get transformed eventually into glucose, which gets delivered to our cells for respiration.
Mr. Duroff,
Okay, our last slide, yes.
is the test, what is
All right, I'll tell you about the quiz after. Let's finish the notes. So just to kind of wrap it all up and summarize these both. Photosynthesis. The reactants are light, water, and carbon dioxide. The order you have the reactants in is not important. You could have written water plus CO2 plus light. The products of photosynthesis, glucose and oxygen. Photosynthesis energy from the sun is changed, transformed into chemical bonds of glucose. And that happens in which organelle?
The chloroplast.
Chloroplast.
So photosynthesis is really important because that's what
Yeah.
helps us breathe.
Yeah, it gives oxygen, it puts oxygen in the atmosphere.
If we didn't have them,
Respiration, the reactants are glucose and oxygen. The products are ATP, a form of energy all living things need, and carbon dioxide and water. So respiration is a process that happens in all cells, and it happens in the mitochondria, the powerhouses of. So that should make sense. We know that the function of the mitochondria is to release energy. And so cellular respiration releases energy. It happens in the mitochondria, and it's the main source of energy for all living things. Plants need respiration as well as photosynthesis. Because in photosynthesis they make glucose, but they still need to get that glucose into the form of ATP. So in plant cells, respiration also happens. That's why plant cells have mitochondria.
Does ATP, or does respiration happen in us too?
Yes. All right, to wrap it up, this should be pretty simple. Photosynthesis, raise your hand if you could tell me, what does it require? Which material? Kira? What else?
Light.
Does need light. What else are the reactants? Bella?
Carbon dioxide.
Yep. Light, water, and carbon dioxide. That's what's needed. What's needed in respiration? What does respiration require? Colton? Glucose and oxygen. What's the end product or products of photosynthesis? Arpan? Glucose and oxygen. What are the end products of cellular respiration? Sophia?
ATP, carbon dioxide, and water.
Correct. The purpose or the goal of photosynthesis, Cam?
To make energy,
Not energy, I wouldn't say,
to make food.
to make food. The purpose of respiration, Griffin?
Make energy.
Yeah, to make energy. the organelle it takes place in? Photosynthesis?
Oh,
Colon?
Chloroplast.
Chloroplast? How about respiration, Joey?
Mitochondria.
Mitochondria? And then finally, what types of organisms does photosynthesis happen in? What types of organisms? Arpon?
heterotrophs.
No? I think you're mixing the two up. Ella? Plants, autotrophs. There are some other things, some bacteria, some protists. We're going to just say plants. Finally,
Good afternoon, we have a couple of
animals and plants
Gilbert
for
Club
respiration.
Today after school. Mrs. Morgan, student from today.